we all have to track terrorist financing and other things like that. So that remains obligations which we all face under the law. The last point is really around credit. Last 2 points. The one around credit. And again, during COVID, the Bank of Zambia had provided support to the market. One of the things which was very clearly stated was that the small players really didn't benefit as much because the commercial banks were taking all of the risks. So we are getting towards the final stages of defining a credit guarantee framework, and we hope to do something which can encompass the whole market rather than a piecemeal approach. So we're working with private sector partners to be able to do that, and we hope to have concluded that by the end of this year, so that again in 2024 this can be put in place. And we have a specific focus, I think, on MSMEs, so that they can really be the engine for employment and growth as well. The last point is really on our regulations. Honorable Chair, honorable members, we are very grateful for the support which was given in passing the Bank of Zambia Act. We think this strengthens the governance arrangements in the bank and our ability to achieve our objectives. We are now coming to the last aspect of our laws, which is the Banking and Financial Services Act. And so we will be conducting a review of that legislation. And we did, I think the last element of that was that we did get approval from Cabinet to proceed with, sorry, that was with the Payment System Act. There are two acts, the Payment System Act and then the Banking and Financial Services Act. So on the Banking and Financial Services Act, we are proceeding. The Payment System Act as well, we are proceeding. So really, Chair, honorable members, that is the conclusion. Maybe I could just add that we really wish to reiterate the commitment that the Bank of Zambia has to performing its role in achieving the targets for inflation and international reserves, as well as maintaining stability in the financial sector. We fully support the measures contained in the 2024 budget, which are aimed at stimulating growth and improving the livelihoods of the people. Effective coordination and implementation of the budget and the measures which you, honorable members, will approve will be critical to shaping the future of our country. It's also very important that clear linkages are established between the national budgets and the 8th National Development Plan, so that clear long-term goals and priorities are reflected in the programs of the ministries. Without this alignment, the laudable goals and plans in the 8th NDP will not be achieved, and hence this is obviously to the detriment of sustainable growth, poverty reduction, and the ultimate goal of creating a more equal and just society in Zambia. So we submit, Honorable Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor, Operations, and your team for the presentation. Maybe before we start, we'll just request that we need to have a copy of your PowerPoint presentation, so that in our own time, we see especially the graphs as you are taking us through. That will be important because what we have is the main text. Honourable members, I see 3 hands. Honourable Kafwaya, okay, 4. So start with Honourable Kafwaya, Honourable Kulukusandi, Honourable Simushi, in that order. Honourable Kafwaya.
Oh, Mike.
Your mic, okay, thank you.
Honourable Chair, I would like to appreciate you for the opportunity. And just by way of introducing myself, my name is Mtoto Kafwaya, Member of Parliament for Lunte constituency. I also wish to place on record my appreciation for the presentation from the bank. Honourable Chair, I have one question, but just a pedestrian comment, which I will start with. The Honourable Minister of Finance this morning told the nation that there are several good things which are happening as a result of the response to the progress we are making as a nation in terms of debt restructuring. I just wanted to find out if it is possible for the bank to indicate why the kwacha, the exchange rate, is not responding to the debt restructuring. Honourable Chair, my substantive question is based on local borrowing. I am happy I can see Dr. Pamu, who at some point was the architect of the national budget. I see from the borrowing plan that the Minister of Finance is going to borrow 83.2 2 billion kwacha locally. But in the resource envelope, the minister has put only 16 billion kwacha. And he has said the difference is going to go towards settling maturities in that same year. And I did math, the simple mathematics, the difference there is 67 billion. Then I went to the expenditure schedule for the minister, where I found the local debt service. The minister there put a figure of 32.9 billion, not 67 billion. That means this difference now will give me a further difference of 34.3 billion, which has not been disclosed. My problem is that this, highlighting 16 billion as the borrowing, local borrowing for 2024 may be erroneous. The minister needed to highlight 83.2 billion. I therefore put it to the bank that this budget is understated by 67 billion kwacha. Honorable Chair, I would like confirmation from the bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honorable Nkulukusa.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Dr. Chipimo, for an enlightening presentation. Very grateful. I think mine is just wanted to, I'm Nkulukusa Mwabashike, a member of Parliament for Katuba constituency and a member of the Planning and Budgeting Committee. I just wanted to get your comments. There was a discussion with some of the think tanks, and I think it was more talking of challenging traditional thinking when it comes to budgeting and things like that. And there are two things that they raised where I want you to comment on. Number one, they felt that targeting inflation in the budget at single digit somehow does not add so much value, because they feel that it further squeezes people, reduces purchasing power, and with the increasing poverty, you find that if people can't spend, therefore the high cost of living continues to be what it is. They felt it wasn't really a necessary target that unlocks the potential, because they feel that liquidity must be in the hands of the people. I'm sure you understand better. They further also commented on this, the same thing of the target of 3 months reserves. They said this has become like a tradition, always targeting 3 months as if this happens by default. Why not target 4? Why not 5? Why not 6? After all, reserves are very good, and you put strategies that aim to achieve that. But every year we seem to be being around just there, as if these things just happen by default and not by planning. I just wanted your comments on those. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Smushi.
Thank you. I'm Frank Smushi, Member of Parliament for Skongo constituency. My question is similar to the first part of my colleague here, but I think from a different angle. I think the element of inflation, I think one of the witnesses that we had, I think he mentioned that it's maybe not really necessary to even have it as an indicator in terms of progress of economic performance, because in the previous administration we saw inflation reaching almost 24%, but the cost of living, people are saying, was low. So now we had inflation reaching 9.9%, but the cost of living was high. So then what's happening? Was what we expected was with a low inflation percentage, then the cost of living or the prices were supposed to be equally respond in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Governor, can you respond to those? But just to make a comment, I think Honorable Gafoya has raised two questions. That was the issue of the exchange rate. Why is it not responding to the issue of the debt restructuring? And also, his second question, and bear with me, Honorable Gafoya, is more of what we discussed. You appeared before this committee when you were looking at the figures, the annual borrowing plan. But in terms of the figures, why that difference, the 67 billion, which you talked about. But however, if you still have sufficient information to that, you can still tackle it, and you can also address this too. Okay, Deputy Governor can respond to this.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I think I should also add that if I come unstuck, I will call upon my colleagues as well to support me. Honorable Kafwaya, so two questions. I think the first one, why the Kwacha is not responding to specifically the debt discussions. I think, I always like to say at the end of the day, the Kwacha is down to two simple things, demand and supply. But just like we often say that common sense is not very common. It's simple, but it's complicated. But if you really want to understand, what are the motivations? So in the period we've been in, and we talked about mining sector performance, for example, in the first half of the year, there was a significant drop from what was expected. And so you had almost a supply shock to the market. And yet the economy is coming out of a period when things are picking up. Things are picking up. So you have demand driving a lot higher than the supply. The second point is, so there's a mismatch which reflects in the price. The second point is just that conceptual that the exchange rate is moved by demand and supply. It means there are many things which can actually hit that exchange rate. When we talk about the issue of news, for example, and we know there's a lot of research, news impacts exchange rates because people have expectations of things they're going to do depending on where the exchange rate is. And they move. They move beforehand depending on what they think. And so expectations play an important point, but eventually they will express themselves in demand and supply. So maybe I'm a person who sells $20 million every month faithfully. I begin to think that rate might change, deviate significantly. I stop selling. I say, I'll wait, I'll sell next month. That is impacting that demand-supply equation. So the basic point here is that it's really not one piece of news will respond, but I think what's important is to have the bigger picture. What does the resolution mean when it happens? Because it means it's unlocking a lot of things which were stopping people from being able to invest, from even companies to be able to lend to Zambia. We've not talked very much about credit ratings. When we went into default, our credit ratings were downgraded. At the central bank, we saw this in a very clear way. Even there, when you're talking to banks and saying, there's a good company here, can you invest in it? They say, oh, the way the financial markets work now, if you've been downgraded, even asked to lend to another big company, we take the rating of the sovereign. That's what's going to determine how much money we can give you. So again, think about it. You conclude these debt restructuring deals. What the rating agencies have said is, we'll remove that default tag. It opens up things. But this, of course, would take time. And so I think I wouldn't concentrate, for me, not so much in the one news. It is signifying something very significant which has been unlocked. So that's the only thing I can say. Because there's also Israel, all these things going on. A shock could come. And then we'll say, but this hasn't happened. So I think that's the only point I'd make. On the debt restructure, the borrowing plan, I really wouldn't want to go into the numbers because I don't think I'm most competent. But maybe we'll just talk to the principle. And it is that, when I look at my deficit, I'm really saying, what am I borrowing? It's a net concept. Okay? What am I borrowing in addition to what I have? But here in Parliament, you people appropriate everything I spend. So you have to declare in the domestic market, most of it is, I borrow money, I pay you back with a bond. Most people are interested to say, oh, when my bond matures, I want to put that money back in and I'll take my interest. So the government is basically refinancing that debt. What we're hoping is, as interest rates come down, they'll be refinancing it at a lower cost. That's why the deficit is important. But the point is, there's a good part of it which they're just refinancing. So they're not getting more in debt purely by refinancing. They're getting more in debt because they're saying, okay, on top of what we need to refinance, we're going to take a bit more. And that is what the minister is talking about in terms of the deficit. The exact numbers you've given, I couldn't speak to them, but my sense is that the deficit, the budget adds up. That's my understanding from the numbers I've seen, and that there isn't really any gap at all. But as I said, I can't speak to those numbers. Honorable Nkulukusa, on the inflation, I mean, these are important this is an important question you always get. And it's got, firstly, two real points. One, I've said inflation hurts those who have a fixed income the most. So it's a bit dangerous to say that, well, it doesn't matter if prices go to 24% or 30%, because the person who doesn't have other assets which can keep up with inflation is in trouble. So on that one, I think the evidence is quite clear. Having low inflation is better, because high inflation brings all manner of other problems which you won't see. The second point is, okay, so in dealing with inflation, you're tightening liquidity. But I think it's important to understand the system as a whole, not the steps, okay? Because in conducting monetary policy, yes, we might tighten financial conditions. And typically what we've seen, if you tighten very strong, for example, might be maybe the exchange rate is the one which has moved. You tighten conditions, the exchange rate holds. That feeds into lower inflation. That outcome is better for everybody. A more stable exchange rate gives much more benefit to those who borrow, those who don't borrow. Lower inflation, again, is better for everybody. So I think it's important not to be fixated about the steps, that because monetary policy is acting to reduce inflation, that's a bad thing. The real villain is inflation. And we must do everything we can to actually get it. On the 3 months of reserves, you know, funnily enough, we've asked this question professionally, yeah? Because when you do the models, the IMF have a big model of reserve adequacy. Very complicated things. They all seem to kind of settle around 3 months. But the way in which I would explain it is this. The government has very specific targets on reserves in terms of the broader concept of the regional integration. And that's 6 months, because they say all countries must move to 6 months of imports. As I said in the program, it's 5 months, so it's not just 3 months. What they're saying here is, as we're getting to those things, we must have some minimum standard which we keep. And the best way I can say this is that if you're saying what is 3 months, it's like a car. You've got your fuel gauge. There's a point on the fuel gauge which is red. It's E, and there it's telling you that when you get into this, you don't have very much far to go with your car. I think this is the way you could think about this 3 months. It's saying, you know, once you're getting below 3 months, you're kind of in red. Anything can happen, and you won't be able to move forward. So I think that's the point on that one. The last one, you know, cost of living is still high. I think here there's a kind of a complicated issue of people thinking about levels. And then there's also an issue of understanding that inflation is an average price. So what you, Honourable Member of Parliament, may face is different from me, because it depends on what my basket is, what I spend my money on. Those who drink, some buy bottles of whiskey for 1,000 kwacha. In other areas, that's a salary for somebody. So the point is, when we think about inflation, you are saying on average, because we're trying to act in a way in which you influence the system as a whole, generally prices. Some prices in some provinces will be high, others low. And ZAMSATs now actually produce different prices. And you can see in some areas they're quite different. So I think the question of, you know, inflation, it doesn't matter. We firmly believe that it matters. That having a small change in prices, and we think 6 to 8% is what is reasonable, is what is supportive of overall growth. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we go to, I noted the hand from Honorable Mukosa, but and okay, I've seen 3 more. We'll take all of them because we are still dealing on the issues of the inflation. As at 19th October, I think about 9 billion kwacha had been paid out by NAPSA through that partial withdrawal. And I think people would want to find out, is there an impact of this to achieve that target of 6 to 8% in terms of your inflation? So maybe, because since you are still talking about that issue, maybe you can respond to that, and then we'll go to the next round of questions.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't, I mean, we model NAPSA in the inflation story in kind of, we think about it in terms of what happens when people have more money in their hands, and how does that boost demand and therefore push overall prices? But the NAPSA case had sort of different dimensions, right? Just on one level, you could say we gave out this 9 billion, people spend it, it's going to boost prices. But you have to ask the question, what are people spending on? And this is where I'm saying that we haven't probably had a deep enough look at what did everybody spend that money on NAPSA on. Others saved it, others may have bought houses, others may have done something which is productive. In other words, that's going to have a very different effect on the overall change in prices in the economy than somebody who may have just gone to a bar and drank his money. Of course, it will make good money for the bar owner, and so he may say, look, I've made profits, but it's a very different way of thinking about somebody who may say, well, I wasn't able to buy a house, or I was able to start a project and I'm doing something productive, and that has a different impact on the economy. So in honesty, we haven't modeled fully all the different ways in which people spent that money. The way typically you do it is a rough and ready way would be to talk about, okay, it may boost demand this way, money supply may go up this way, and that impacts the inflation process in a certain way. And that we do. And we tend to think that that process of the money demand side has probably been less muted. But Jonathan may want to comment in other ways. But that's so far what we see is it's more muted. It's more going to be more interesting to think about what did people use their money from on, and how did that help the economy. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you. So, honourable members, we'll take 4, and these will be the last ones. Then we'll close. So, we'll start with Honourable Mukosa, then Honourable Mumba, then Honourable Mtalanja. The last one will be Honourable Mabumba, but not the least. You can just switch off your mic, Deputy Governor. Thank you. Honourable Mukosa.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Governor, I want to ask you on this issue of international reserves, where we have targeted to have at least 3 months of import cover. Honorable Nkulukusa, I was asking that some people have said we always want to target 3 months because that is like the acceptable minimum. Considering that we are going to have this debt that we have restructured, and we are anticipating to pay lesser than we were going to pay next year, why is it that we have still maintained the three months import cover? Couldn't we have targeted maybe something higher? Because obviously we won't be paying what we're supposed to be paying. So some of that money that we are going to save, that we are not going to use to pay and will be with us, can't it be used to improve our international reserves? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Mumba.
Thank you, Chairperson, and Bank of Zambia, welcome. My name is Anthony Mumba, the Member of Parliament for Kantanshi. Governor, I wanted to take you back to inflation. In the last 2.5 years to 3, the central bank, in trying to arrest inflation, has increased through its monetary policy committee, has increased interest rates 3 times. Now that obviously has added to the cost of borrowing money. Now this is purely one of the reasons why, which came out clearly from the central bank, is that you're trying to arrest inflation. But there are other drivers, like you have rightly said, food prices, fuel prices, that have continued to fuel this inflation. Now, but I wanted to find out, because ideally in an organized economy, where fundamentals are clearly being are predictable, yes, the decision that you made was as a bank through your monetary policy committee would be right. But in this particular case, you have made the cost of doing business go up. So going forward, as a central bank and looking at how vulnerable our economy is right now, production is low, whether it's in the mining sector, which is supposed to be our main pillar, whether it's in manufacturing, agriculture. What are some of the measures that central bank would take to try and support the growth of our economy through making the cost of borrowing money cheaper? Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mutale.
Chair, there are three sectors here that have been receiving incentives from the ministry and the budget starting from 2021, 2022, and I'm sure now also. These are tourism, manufacturing, and the mining industry. And truth be told, we haven't recorded growth from these three sectors. We've been told that we are recording growth, and we did record growth in the first quarter and the second quarter. Governor for the bank, in your own understanding as a bank, if you are to give advice to the minister, should he continue giving these incentives, or we can find those sectors which are growing our economy to incentivize them? I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Mabumba.
Chair, for me, Deputy Governor, on page 11 of your submission, when you talk about the implementation of the export process tracking framework, how different is this system from that the Ministry of Finance then in 2013 implemented? And to what extent do you think that this would be able to work for the Zambian people? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Governor and your team, you can respond to those, and then we'll close.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I think all very important questions. I think back on international reserves, why shouldn't it be more? I think the point I was trying to make is that there are clear reserve targets which are above 3 months, which the government is committed to. 6 months is the regional one, although we're very far away from that, but it's a commitment. In the program with the IMF, I think by the end of 2025, we're meant to be at 5 months of import cover. So there's a very clear understanding that we have to move from 3 months. The way it's phrased in the budget is above. So it's almost framed in the way in which don't let reserves fall below this level. But it is consistent with us going upwards, because those are the concrete things which are there. If you look at the macro framework properly, even if you download the data in the IMF program, you'll see there's a very clear idea that as you're moving on this debt restructuring process, you should come out at the end of it with a much more stronger reserve position. There's only one point I wanted just to, really as a point of caution when we talk about debt is being resolved and therefore you should have. The where we were with debt had really two fundamental problems. One, it really was a recognition, which is why people talk about haircuts, that you're in a position where you just weren't going to be able to pay. And so an important aspect of debt is not a simple switching. Now I have money and now I can spend on this. It is that you are fundamentally reforming your economy and you're going to now be able to have growth which otherwise wouldn't have been able to take place. Yes, you now have resources to spend in a better way than you were before because it was all going on debt. But the real issue of the debt is that what it is doing is enabling the economy to breathe, to grow. And I think that's an important point, that we keep coming back to this thing of, if the economy doesn't grow, if that isn't the center of what we're trying to push, we'll be back in a debt situation again sometime in the future. And so that's, I think, one thing the minister keeps emphasizing on growth, which I think is important. I think on inflation, again, Honorable Mumba, it's about, I guess for me, really being clear and distinctive about the process. So when people talk about interest rates, for example, more and more now we ask ourselves, let's unpack that position. Two, the first point is monetary policy has its role, very clear. You have inflation, these are the tools you have, and that's what you can use. Fiscal policy also has a role. Yes, these are more policies which boost growth, but they also have an important role on inflation if you think about it. So if you sort out food, agriculture, a lot of these things, that has an impact on inflation. Confidence in the fiscal deficit will feed into the exchange rate in the sense in which if you're not spending so much on debt, there's less demand for foreign exchange. So each section, monetary, fiscal, will have its role. But for us, it's very clear the tools we have and what we use. And one of the conversations we've been having with the banks, to be honest, is to say, well, let's look at what is accounting for that gap. Because if you think about it, a policy rate at 10%, and between that, there's a lending rate of 25. What is accounting for this difference? And that's the point which we keep making now, to say before we were talking about, oh, there was debt. That was why we were not sure we could lend. You were in default, so the risk premium for you was very high. There was instability. And what we're saying is all these things which we were being told is the thing which is making the wedge. Even the high government yield rates, which is an important factor, right? Because the banks can lend to government or lend to you. So even that, when these things begin to come down, when you begin to see yield rates being compressed, when you begin to see us out of default, clearly the next thing is the excuses we were giving for there being this high risk goes away. But of course that's not enough. That's just the macro. The specific we are trying to do is to say, we saw it when we lent money in COVID. The small people didn't really benefit. And the banks quite honestly came and said, but look, you're not taking any risk yourselves. So we said, okay, we think it's a credible point to make. And so we'll then design a system where we'll take a bit of risk so that the amount you are lending can come down by the risk which the central bank is prepared to take in terms of this facility which it's putting up. So that's the practical way in which we're hoping to help the situation. So there are two things. The overall policies of the government will help the environment to push. But there's some specific things which we are doing in the credit guarantee and so on, and even increasing competition in the payment system, for example, bringing more players in who can lend directly to or work with non-banks to lend directly to the market. All of these things are bringing pressure to bear, hopefully, to compress interest rates. So the question of inflation for us is we have to keep true to what our tools are and what our objective is, because we think that's important. And that's really why we use the tools we use. But on the lowering the cost, those are the specific issues which I can say we are doing. Honorable Mutale, on the three sectors, again, a very important question. And I think for me, it goes back to the final point which we made, which was that, honorable members, you approved the 8th National Development Plan. I mean, it went through Parliament. It was a national document. It was a longer-term vision. People went through a lot of time and consultation and thinking to say, what are the constraints to growth? How can we bring that growth on the table? And how is it going to link to the other sectors of the economy? And these sectors which have been mentioned, they're the ones which people came around and said, look, mining, it has a resource, it can grow. Agriculture, it can grow, it can get employment, it has very big linkages to the rest of the economy. Tourism, again, these are the things in the plan. And so it would be a bit strange if, having taken all this time to think and get consensus, we then say, oh, this is not working, let's do something else. Because growth is a long-term story at the end of the day. We have to be persistent in the policies that we're going to implement. And in the plan, there are also the social sector, which we have to take account of as people are growing or as some sectors are benefiting, those others might not be. So I will come back and say, if we really believe that the 8th National Development Plan was a good development plan and project, surely what we should be saying is, in the national budget, how are we linking it Are we going consistent with it? Are we going away? In the ministry budgets which are coming, can we really align the things they're doing with what's in the plan? Because you've spent all this time to think about what's really going to drive growth, what's really going to make the difference. And so that would be my point for me, that it's not to say, well, this is growing, it's not. I mean, think about mining. Mining, I invest now. It's going to take a long time before you see that coming. But there still is investment which mining is pulling in, because if I know somebody is setting up a mine, there's a guy who's a supplier who's saying there's an opportunity in Zambia or there's an opportunity on the copper belt, he begins to mobilize money. So there is a sense of crowding in, which hopefully we expect to happen with those investments going in. But the mine itself, of course, you can argue it will take time for the growth to come. Tourism as well. The challenges you see there are infrastructure and other things which are coming. In the measures which have been taken for tourism, we've seen the numbers go up. That's partly a policy-related thing. We saw visas being reduced, but also it's partly, are we marketing more to ourselves to be able to access? Are we developing accessibility to these places? And again, the minister in the budget talked about what they're trying to do there. Manufacturing, again, does take time. We are seeing manufacturing is one of the sectors perhaps in the economy which has grown more significantly now, and hopefully that will continue. So, Honorable Chair, I think that would be the response I make. I hope that has been clear.
I think there was a question from Honorable Mavumba.
Oh, SI 55, yes, sorry. A very important question. So maybe let me say something about the EBOP itself. So in 2019, we effectively found ourselves in a situation where, as you know, Zambia has an open economy. In other words, very few restrictions to what you can do in terms of taking money in and out. And increasingly, when you look at some of the reports you get from FIC or DEC or all these other agencies of how money is moving in and out, it's very clear that not having sufficient information on what is happening was detrimental to the economy. So we said, okay, let's set up a system which is automated, which is working with the banks to simply say, as you're doing your own transactions, the system is collecting data and can able to say, okay, this is what we sent to Germany, this is what we sent to Brazil, this was the sector, and it's all done as you transact. The data is essentially pulled off core banking systems of the financial institution. So we've spent from 2019 essentially a couple of years building that. Okay? It's still a work in progress, but it's working now. Today you can ask me what were these transactions, what sectors, what countries did they go to, and we can give that. But there was one area which was missing, which was that if you're taking money out and you spend it elsewhere, there was a gap we didn't know. So on the trade side, because ZRA capture all this data, when you export, you're filling in documentation, and that trade database is very solid. There were no way you could really reconcile it on the financial flows. So when we're trying to put together a table which shows what is the relationship between Zambia and the rest of the world, there were these gaps which we have to fill in by some kind of estimation, by going to beg to companies, no, can you please tell me what you spent on, and so on. And so once we have basically got the basic system going, we said, look, we need to also deal with this gap. And so the point was then, well, if when you export, you simply have to bring your money into an account here, as if you like the receiving account, and you continue to spend it just as you would an account anywhere else in the world. Just by that process of you transacting in your account here, you're giving us data. You're not filling in a form, you're not filling in, just as you're transacting on the system. That's where the data capture sits. And so then we have a full really reconciliation of, I have a trade database, I have exports, I know this has been earned, and I can reconcile it in terms of the financial flows, because a balance of payments reconciliation has kind of trade and services at the top, and then it's how these things are financed at the bottom. And so this system basically, that's what it does. That's on one point. Now the question then is, well, how is it different from before? Well, it's very different from before. Before, there was no automated system collecting data of imports and exports. What those SIs did was to say, before you pay for debt service or pay for whatever, you have to give me the documentation, I see it. And then I authorize it. At the central bank, we received a whole host of papers of people now giving what were their loans, what were their things, these are approved, then I can send money. So in effect, there was a block on your ability to transact freely. There's no block on your ability to transact freely here. You continue as you were before, with that one difference that you'll be transacting from your account which is here. And people can say, well, that's a problem. Well, a lot of people have accounts here. In our domestic dollar deposits now around $3 billion. In other words, accounts which people have here, corporates and individuals. Obviously, the corporates are bigger. So we don't see it as imposing any imposition, partly because the system works. It's been running for a couple of years. All we are doing is trying to say, let's make its capture full. And then we'll be able to say, from a policy perspective, we get all of these questions from our other colleagues. You're seeing a lot of these things in trend reports. You're seeing obligations we have under these institutions which are relating to anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. All of these things, to be really up to date, you have to understand what's going on in your economy in terms of flows. If you don't, there will be a day something will happen we will not know, and then you'll find some government says we're cutting corresponding banking relationships with Zambia because there's a weakness there. And then the system is in significant trouble. So these are the things which we have basically been concerned about and which we think we've found a solution which is not intrusive, but which enables us to have better information for better policy making. And then it's a better liaison amongst the trade and the financial data, which we think is going to be beneficial for everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Governor. Honorable Kafoya just indicated that he has a very, very brief follow-up to his earlier question. Honorable Kafoya. Your mic, Governor.
Honorable Chair, I have to appreciate your indulgence. And Governor, I want to thank you sincerely for the response you offered me earlier on. Governor, I just wanted to indicate that from my understanding, a national budget is basically income and expenditure. There are no accruals. It's just money that the government plans to receive in a particular year and pay out. Now, when it comes to the question I asked, where government has categorically said they are going to borrow from the local market 83.2 billion, and they are disclosing in the budget only 16 billion, it leaves me still thinking. Because this 16 billion is going to form part of the Appropriation Act, the 178 billion budget. This is the act which will authorize the minister to raise money and spend it. Is it the view of the bank that the 67 billion, which is not included as local borrowing in the budget, are these operations going to be outside of the Appropriation Act, or there is another law which allows government to undertake government operations outside of the Appropriation Act? Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Governor, do you have a response to that?
Chair, I think I'm not going to get into the specifics of what the numbers are. I mean, I disagree with them. I'll be clear there. I disagree with your presentation of the numbers, but it's not the place of the Bank of Zambia to go through and say this is how the budget is worked up. I think on the side we had some of this conversation before. I think in our MP seminars, if I had, and I think we gave a similar answer to you in terms of our understanding of the budget. Yeah, let me leave it there. Budgeting is a complex. We could talk about it, but it's a complex process. But I don't want to get into the appropriations. All I can tell you is that from our side, we're fully competent that the budget, as presented, the numbers are correct as far as we have seen, and that when you talk about funding which is raised, I mean, perhaps a simple way I could ask a question and is, you know, I am at the beginning of a month. I borrowed 10 kwacha into 2 weeks. And then I say, okay, I'm expecting money, 20 kwacha or 30 kwacha at the end of the month. I borrow another 10 kwacha over the second week, so I've borrowed 20 kwacha. Then I get my 30 kwacha income. I pay down the 20 kwacha before the end of the month, and somebody asks, what have you left with at the end of the month? What have you borrowed? Well, at the end of the month, you're not owing anything. You've paid. An income came and you paid. So the point is, point is basically, that's the point is, somebody will simply ask the question, at the end of the year, are you in debt or not? You say, no, I don't owe anybody. And you're saying, no, but at that time you borrowed 20 kwacha and then you paid back. But you're asking me, at the end of the year, am I owing anybody any money? Do I have a liability? No. So sometimes maybe we need to simplify it. Maybe it's an oversimplification, but we can complicate what is a relatively straightforward thing. That at the end of the day, we are talking about what is your indebtedness? What do you owe? If I owe my colleague here and it transfers to him the same amount and I no longer owe her, do I owe any more? No, this is a transaction between these two parties. So that's maybe where I'll leave it.
Okay, honorable members, this is where we come to the end of our interactions for today with our witness. Deputy Governor and your team, we are grateful once again for coming through. Capital of the laws of Zambia in terms of immunity, that which was conferred on you earlier on. We'll also end here. Enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.